Don't worry, Commander. I didn't breathe another word about Scarlet and her ways. It's a relief to know I was right all along, though. When a woman says no to me, we all know what that means. Not interested in men. Period.
Yeah, totally. Story of my life, man. It's not often that game genres get crossed. Combining multiple elements from entirely separate genres may seem like a good idea, but often it leads straight to disaster. I'm guessing Larian Studios knows this, but they went ahead with Divinity Dragon Commander anyway. I guess the question is, does the game hold up? Divinity Dragon Commander is a mix of real-time strategy and third-person combat, somewhat from the same vein as the Mount and Blade series. The majority of the game takes place on the Raven, a command ship from the previous Emperor's fleet, which is donated generously to the player at the beginning of the game by the friendly wizard Maxos. He only has two conditions: kill your siblings, and reunite the entirety of Rivellon under the banner of peace, as your father once did. The Raven is awesome. It contains 6 rooms where your generals, political counselors, wife, and friends gather. The ship's design is wonderfully steampunk, and the entire place oozes a personality of its own. The people inside are even more intriguing, and serve as one of the game's strongest points. Every character has a unique personality that is constantly clashing with those of the opposite view. One of the generals, Catherine, firmly believes that males are the weaker sex, and is constantly talking down to the many cocks that walk the hall. Edmund is pompous but a brilliant mind, and he knows it, and will claim to be better than everyone else at every opportunity. On the opposite end, you have Henry, a down-to-earth, blow-everything-up sort of general, who is more interested in booze and women than political issues. Political councils are also made up of distinct advisors. They will bring up issues throughout the game, many of which mirror current-day political issues. Legality of gay marriage, or making an herb similar to cannabis legal throughout your empire. Your decisions reflect through your approval level with each faction, and have interesting effects throughout your empire, sometimes making the balancing act of politics versus common sense a difficult one. It is a shame that there is no diplomatic elements. In terms of fighting other nations, the enemy is always the enemy, and peace with them can never be acquired. Anything not the color of the player is constantly in a state of being at war with them and each other. I suppose it makes sense, considering the children warring for the throne being the whole premise of the game, but even dire enemies sometimes strike a pact to destroy the biggest threat to both, no? Research and technological advancements are also taken care of aboard the Raven. Players can upgrade units and their dragon abilities using research points that are gained each turn. Research is a very important part of being able to cope with the latter half of the game, though after conquering the entire continent several times, I never really found myself wanting in terms of research points. Capturing several provinces generally yields far more than enough points, and by the end of Chapter 2, I had researched nearly everything possible with still an entire chapter left of the game. All the talking and politics aside, the player takes control of the overmap. Unit pieces are depicted on the overmap as essentially chess pieces. Borders are distinct and colored for the empire that controls them, and moving units is a quick affair of drag and drop. Cards can also be played, allowing for players to attach negative effects such as blowing up buildings in enemy territories, or improving commerce in their own empire to gain an additional amount of gold for a short time. The overmap phase is a quick one, and the UI is easy to use and understand. Much like other turn-based games, make your move, and then hit end turn to see where the fight starts. Fighting is interesting. The game drops players into a map in an RTS perspective. Any units the player brought with them to attack or defend are immediately available and can be ordered around the map. It is supremely important to control as many recruitment cathedrals as possible, and having more units to move quicker is generally a good idea. With enough resources, the player can also build workshops to produce extra units, which can easily turn the tide of battle in the lesser side's favor if they're allowed to expand too quickly. After a short while, players gain the option to morph into their dragon. Morphing takes the form of a third-person shooter, with the player actively controlling every movement of the dragon. It also has a jetpack, which is pretty awesome. Unfortunately, I do have a few problems with the dragon. It seemed to invalidate every other unit I brought with me. Starting with the dragon that innately had the ability to leech life from enemies, I could easily destroy entire armies without their attacks ever doing enough damage to bring me down. In fact, in many battles, I would move my forces close enough to draw the majority of the enemy force away from their base, destroy them with my dragon, and then simply burn the base to the ground without ever sending any of my combat infantry into the thick of the fight. It was too easy to not die, and too easy to kill everything. Sure, when the enemies gained the ability to cloak air units, it was minorly annoying. Once I learned to detect where they were, it became a cakewalk again. I was winning battles that said I had a 0% chance to win because the enemy AI doesn't have the almighty dragon powerhouse to use themselves, which is a shame, and made tactical thinking more based on what do I need to do to survive long enough to get my dragon out, rather than where do I need to position my units to most effectively counter the opposition. In general, the combat is the weakest part of the game. The biggest Zerg always defeats the AI, and while fighting players, it takes the form of who is the better dragon pilot. It's still fun to play, and at times can be pretty rewarding, but as a whole the mechanics of it are merely average. Thankfully, with the exciting characters aboard the Raven, decisions having consequences, and the development of new events and conflicts between personas happening all the time, the rest of the game shines fantastically, and it doesn't let the average combat pull it down. Divinity Dragon Commander from Larian Studios gets a 7 out of 10. If you're a fan of strategy games, I would certainly recommend picking it up. It is available on Steam now for $40 or your regional equivalent. And until next time, stay awesome, and cheers.
Now the dwarves are causing a drought that will wipe the famed but elusive speckled jackal from the face of the earth. If you could ease...
Commander, I wanted to tell you, we dwarves have